Hey guys! In today's lesson, I'm gonna be bringing you some good practices that you should be aware of when coding your themes. Actually, the rules you'll see not only apply to creating themes, but also to creating any kind of code in WordPress, like plugins for example. WordPress, like any major open source project, has its own coding standards. The goal is not to force you to follow all the rules, but to create an environment where everyone kind of speaks the same language, writes code in more or less the same way, and as a result, can be understood much better, can understand what others did, to make changes if necessary, and even improve WordPress itself. Here they say that we should try to write the code so that the files within the project appears as if they were created by a single person. Of course, you cannot follow every recommendation to the letter, because sometimes it will be so hard to do that. I've already downloaded a lot of themes that are inside the theme repository itself, and they don't follow all these rules to the letter. But I will try to follow them as much as possible, especially the most crucial recommendations, okay? Well, the coding standards are divided into categories. We have standards for CSS, HTML, JavaScript, and PHP. In addition to this, there are also some special accessibility rules that you also have to observe, okay? The goal of this lesson is not to dig into some very practical aspects of the coding standards, but to make you aware of some things you cannot do from now on if you want to contribute to the WordPress community in some way, either by giving away your theme for free or by selling the theme. Later, you'll see that all these rules are taken into account. Even if you don't want to contribute to the community, it's good that you know most of these standards because they can also improve your development skills a little bit, okay? So let's start with PHP. Well, here on this page, we got all the main rules. I strongly advise you to take the time to read this page. It looks very long, but it's not. Most of the page content, as you see, are comments from users. So here, for example, it shows the correct way to use single quotes and double quotes in the code. Here they wanted to know that you should almost never escape quotes in your code. You can switch between double and single quotes whenever necessary. For example, this is the right way to use quotes when you need to place a variable inside an echo command using double quotes outside, and inside using single quotes like this. Indentation. Always use tab to indent the code. Only use space in certain circumstances. Here we also have the correct way to use curly braces in conditional blocks and loops. I myself prefer to use the alternative syntax. You may have already noticed in the course. As it makes it easier to switch between PHP and HTML code, I prefer to use this method. Well, there are a lot of other rules. I'm not going to talk about all of them, right? Down here we have a very important one. Never open PHP tags like this. It's easier, but it's not a recommended way. Always use it like this, alright? Another important thing here, always try to omit the PHP closing tag at the end of the file. It is not necessary and can cause problems. I explained why in the first lecture about enqueuing CSS files when we created the functions.php file. So you already know this. Here, very important, space usage. Use spaces in all situations. Put space between numbers, before and after the parentheses. Anyway, the goal is to make your code easy to read. The standards below are also important, but I think the ones I've already talked about are really essential. As I told you, please take some time to read everything very carefully, okay? CSS now. There aren't many rules to follow either. You'll notice that I've already tried to apply most of them to the course files. So this is the correct way for you to structure the CSS code. Each selector should be on its own line. Separate each by a comma and put the next one on the line below, unless you get only one selector in the CSS rule. This is wrong since it makes the code difficult to read. This is also wrong I'll confess that I prefer to write CSS like this, but that makes things easier only for me. If someone else tries to read my code, they will be in trouble. So try not to do that, okay? Write it like this. Other things you should avoid, don't use camel case in selector names, or underscore, overqualification, which is putting the element type in front of the selector. And this is totally wrong because it's not a valid selector name. And this is also wrong because the quotes are missing. But I must confess that I've already seen a lot of WordPress code with a lot of these imperfections here. The selectors inside WooCommerce files, for example. Remember that WooCommerce is a kind of official WordPress plugin, so it's full of overqualified selectors or selectors with underscores. That doesn't mean that you can't do any better. One more rule, don't write CSS properties in uppercase. Try to use the short form when you can. For example, instead of writing the white color like this, write it like this. Here they explain that there is an order to write the properties inside the CSS that makes the most sense, which is by following this order here, or by putting them in alphabetical order like this. Pay close attention to the prefixes as well. There are properties that only work in certain browsers with the use of prefixes. To help you out, you can check the Can I Use website to see if a certain property works correctly in all browsers, or if it needs any prefix. You can also use a tool called Auto Prefixer to make your life easier, okay? Values. These are recommendations for anyone who starts learning CSS, like you don't add units when you get a 0 value, except in some specific cases. Always add 0 to the left side when you get non-integer values. Use quotes in font names when needed. Media queries. So the correct thing is to add all media queries at the end of the file, at the bottom of the style sheet file, all of them grouped by a media type, okay? We have already done that in our file, so you can check it out. Here they say something about the comments, and you can take a look too. Let's go to the HTML now, guys. Here are very few standards. For example, the correct way to work with self-closing elements. Those that have no closing tag, for example, the line break, BR element. Always do a space and close the tag with a self-closing slash. And here are other rules about attributes, tags, quotes usage, and indentation. I don't think there's much of a secret here. Now let's move on to JavaScript. We have all the rules for writing JavaScript here. I won't waste much time here because our theme code has very little JavaScript. But if that's your case, do a good reading. And finally, accessibility standards. You should consider that your theme can be replicated in several sites around the world and can be used by people of all conditions, including people with special needs, especially blind people or people with low vision. All WordPress code must comply with the WCAG 2.0 standards, which are the accessibility guidelines for web content. So whenever you're building something for the web, you need to consider that it should be as accessible as possible for everyone. I know it's really quite complicated because we don't usually worry about that much in our daily lives. I certainly must have made a lot of mistakes about it in this course, but it's essential that both you and I know that these rules exist and have a very practical purpose, which is to give everyone equal opportunities to access information. So here are some important rules. I've tried to follow the ones I could during the course, but perhaps I've still made a lot of mistakes. Maybe later I'll have the chance to correct all of them if there's any. For example, correct the usage of HTML semantics. First, never forget the H1 in all your pages, so your theme can't never skip this tag. And you should follow the correct order when using the other tags whenever possible. Here below are some rules for you to define when a clickable element has to be a button or an anchor tag. This is essential: color contrast. Always try to use color combinations that generate the best possible contrast ideas. The elements have to be quite distinct on the screen. For example, if you have a dark background, the text should be as light as possible. Your browser's developer tool can help you with that. Here, for example, in the Chrome tool, when you inspect the text, you can see the contrast ratio for the color property. You have a ratio of 1 for very little contrast and 21 for a high contrast, like black over white. This can help a lot. And here there are other standards you must follow. User not underlines on a link. You should also be sure that users can use the keyboard to do the same thing that they can do with the use of a mouse. Anyway, a good reading through this documentation will help you a lot if you still have doubts. In the course files available for download until this lesson, you'll notice that I tried to apply most of these coding standards. It's the least you should try to do too if you want to contribute really to the WordPress community, okay? So that's it. In the next few lessons, we'll start testing our theme. Let's see if it really meets our expectations. So I'll be waiting for you guys. Bye.